project requires you to go out a paper, to review a paper, whether you've written it or it is one that was written already, or an article. The Sacrament of Holy Communion is not only a paper that I have written, it's actually a book in progress. And this evening, I am hoping that I am able to give you a bit more knowledge of the Sacrament of Holy Communion. Because what has happened is, across the world, there are many denominations. And as you can see, we've got a few listed here. And many times people will go and say, well, this denomination isn't doing it correct, or that denomination isn't doing it correct. Through my training as a minister, I have come to learn a very interesting saying. They are not wrong. They are just different. Because each one of these denominations view the Sacrament of Holy Communion for the same reason, honoring what Christ has ordained for us within the Gospels. As you can see, I've just listed a few of the ministries that I've been to, and what I've done for this book is I have literally interviewed each one of these to find out not only what they do with regards to the communion, but why they do it and how different it is. The plan for the book is that it will start with a view of all of the different ministries, and then it will climax with the gospel written by Christ of what he has ordained, so that everybody can see where it comes from. Again, these are just a few of the ministries. I've chosen 3 readings from the Bible for which I've circled this presentation around. And all 3 speak of the Lord's Supper. The one that I've chosen to highlight this evening is 1 Corinthians. And there it says, "For I received from the Lord what I have also handed to you, that the Lord Jesus on the night he was betrayed," and we know the whole story, so I'm not going to read that. But we know what happened that night. We know that not only did he have the awesomeness of sharing that meal, he was also betrayed by someone sitting at that table in the Garden of Gethsemane. But I'm not going to go into that story because we could be here all night. Now, the Lord's Supper is known as the Lord's Supper, the Sacrament of Holy Communion, the Holy Eucharist, the meal, the celebration, the supper. There are many names for it, but yet it comes to the same point of what it is and what it stands for. This was the last meal for Jesus before his crucifixion, before he was given that kiss, if you want to say, which it was. And of course, a kiss these days means different than what it did back then for that circumstance. But now, how is it observed? First of all, it is observed using unleavened bread. Jesus Christ raised unleavened bread and broke it. Now, unleavened bread, in case you're unsure of what that is bread that has no yeast, has no rising agent. Okay? So that's what he would have used. And he used the fruits of the vine, which would have been in the cup. Now, many people have argued that he had alcohol. Many have argued he's had water. But in the Bible, it states he raised a cup and he broke unleavened bread. But how often should we take it? He said in his word, take as often as you can. Now, there are some denominations or ministries, as I will use for this presentation, that will take it every week. There are some that take it once a month. There's some that take it once a year. So each ministry is different in the times that they take it, but the Bible says take as often as you can. Now, what does observance of the sacrament? The sacrament is representation of our redemption. A memorial of the suffering and the death of Jesus Christ. It represents a token of love and union with Christians have with Christ and with one another. The idea that was brought behind that was Christ giving himself to each one of us. And he showed us the sharing at the table when he broke that bread and blessed that cup. He is showing the family, the unity, and the solemnity of it. And many times it is not known. And what I would say at this point is I've asked questions many times to young people when I was doing confirmation classes, what does the sacrament of Holy Communion mean to you? The following, I was told. Meal in between meal within the service. My snack. Mommy can get up and walk around. I can follow her in the church. I was given a whole pack of meanings. And then I decided, let me ask some of the older folk what that meant. And do you know, some of them did not know what the sacrament of communion is. And the problem is, we have these sacraments within our churches, and many of our members do not fully understand it. So this book is hoping and praying that this will bring an open light to others of what it is and how it's shared by other churches. And I know some people may have questions. I'm going to take them a little later. Now, when in the service, the sacrament observed, and who can observe it and who can do the condom? Let me tell you, in each church, there is a minister, or there is an elder, or there is a senior pastor who is ordained and given the rights to bless the communion, to break the bread, to bless the wine, and to share it. And the administration can usually be done by any member of the church. Now, in my research, I have found that there are some churches that don't have a pastor who can do this. So what they do is they get some of the senior men of the church to bless it. And I've asked, but why do you do that? Why do you all not have a senior pastor? How could a church not have a senior pastor? Well, I've been given a whole set of different reasons. I've been told that they have never thought about it, they've never had it. And our churches are supposed to be grounded by a senior minister who has been called by God, trained by, hopefully, some other senior ministers in order to carry this out. So the ordained minister is the one that should really be blessing the sacrament. And usually you can tell that person because they're usually dressed up a little bit more. And as my dear ministerial colleague here would agree, some of them are in a uniform that's a lot hotter than everybody else because they're all in their gowns and their robes and stuff. And they can normally be identified. And then the communion, in some churches like the Anglican and the Roman Catholic, would have persons who would be assisting the minister in the service and the dispensations of it. But how is the sacrament celebrated? Now, the Roman Catholic Church use what's called a chalice, and the Anglican Church as well, and they use what's called a patented plate. And this evening, what I've done is I've brought with me, if I may clear a spot here for a second, Madam President. I just want to take this out. These are instruments that I was using when I was in the ministry. This would have been my chalice. I'm sorry if you can't see from there. This would have been my chalice, and this would have carried the wine. Now, in some churches, they use what's called a communion wine, which has alcohol. In some, they use a fortified wine where they mix it with water. And in some churches, they use grape juice, and in some churches, they use water. And some churches, what they do is the Roman Catholic and the Anglican will use a chalice, and as you know, the chalice will pass around, and persons will take a sip and so forth. And then there are other churches where they will use what's called a communion cup, which I brought a couple for you to see. Now, the bread itself, in churches, they're using various breads. They're using unleavened bread, they're using regular bread, but they're also using what is called a communion wafer. Now, the beautifulness of the communion wafer is already prepared, and it is properly portioned, because you never know if you get somebody that says they had a little bit more bread than I did. So they try to use the communion wafers, and it's also more sanitary as well. The communion wafers will normally be put on like a pattern, which could either be glass, or it could be put on a piece of a metal plate, which is usually bronze, usually gold, depending on the church, or it may just be a silver plate. Oops. And these are used more or less in like the Roman Catholic, the Anglican churches. There are some Pentecostals that will use them, but the majority of the other religions will use the small cups that you can see. And again, they're going. Now what I will do is I'd like to inject it this time, because through a bit of research that I've done in preparation for this again, I have found that with COVID-19, a lot of the churches are moving to the communion cups because it is more healthy and safer at this time. just before I take your questions, I'm going to close this part with this. Today, the sacrament of the Lord's Supper is seen as a great celebration, the profound presence of Jesus Christ in the service. When the time for the communion approaches, one's heart leaps with joy as the priest elevates the bread and the wine. As you approach the altar to receive the sacrament, you can only imagine yourself walking as one of the 12 apostles present at the supper. By taking the bread and the wine, it is no longer I that lives, but Christ who lives in me. He tells us, I abide in you and you abide in me. He also reminds us in Matthew 11:28-30, come to me, all who labor and are burdened, and I will give you rest. This is just a shortness of what my paper is about. I now open the floor to any questions, and I will see if I can answer them for you. I open the floor. Yes, sir.
My question is, I went to the church, right? And they offer persons determined to take point. But every door like they're ritual. For me, I don't really like people are saying the cup before, but then they're stopping. Right? Am I not accepting the because of that? I'm not accepting the law.
If I understand you correctly, you went to a church and the way that they were administering the communion you were not comfortable with?
No, I'm not comfortable.
Okay, well, what I will say is this. Is that what you're saying? Okay. Really and truly, the acceptance of the Lord's Supper is your choice. If you visit a church and they are not administering it in a way that you are comfortable, you do not have to take it. You can stay in your seat. If they pass and they pass the bread and you take the bread, but the cup is in a chalice and you feel uncomfortable, you don't have to take the wine. You don't have to. It is your personal choice. Remember, the table is not a Methodist table, a 7 Days table, an Anglican. It's the Lord's table. So if you decide, I don't want to take the wine because I am not comfortable with that chalice, that's between you and the Lord. That has nothing to do with the church itself because they are administering it on his behalf. So that's your personal choice. That's your personal choice. Any other questions? Any other questions? Yes, sorry, I didn't see that.
Thank you. So I had the opportunity to taste possibly 2 or 3 different types of the wafers.
Right.
Is there a particular type, or question I'm really asking, is it supposed to have a taste, or is it supposed to be as bland and neutral as possible?
That's a very good question. First of all, as I said, not all churches use wafers. Some will use bread. I can say for the Methodist Church, which I'm part of, at Easter we use unleavened bread because that is what was originally used. The wafers are they will change in taste depending on where they're from and who has manufactured them and this sort of thing, because it's not manufactured by the church. And a lot of it will depend on how they're stored and kept. So my response to that would be, if you have found the wafer has not tasted like normal, mention it to the steward of the church, just in a polite manner, because it may be something that they may need to look at, but normally the wafers usually taste all the same, pretty bland in itself. Okay? Yes, sir?
Well, Pastor Deane, the Bible is based, some of us, on interpretation.
Correct.
And the way we interpret things, we tend to follow the same thoughts, go as parallel thoughts. Now, I've been fortunate or privileged to attend a witness service, Jehovah's Witness service, where in their estimation, they would not take bread and wine the conventional way, but they would do it whereby they passed it around. Every person would hold the wine. I said, okay,
Correct.
Touch it, I think it's back up to the elders. My question is, why is there right and you're wrong?
That is a very good question, and I would say this. It's interesting that you chose Jehovah's Witness because they were one of the ones that actually I spent the most time with because I was continuously arguing with myself with the same question. It comes down to the very basics. One question: why do you celebrate the Lord's Supper, the meal, as they call it, the meal? The Eucharist. Why do they celebrate it? And I found out they celebrate it because they recognize as Christ's order through scriptures. That's why they celebrate it, which is where it is based. They are not wrong, they're just different. The Mormon Church or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints do it the same way. They pass around the tray and then they pass around the bread. They do it pretty much the same way. So that is why I'm saying it's not wrong, it's just different. But my main question that I posed to each one of the churches that I showed you earlier was, why do you do it? Because whether you use glass or you use metal, why do you break the bread? Why do you serve it? Why do you acknowledge it being Christ? So it basically goes down to not wrong, it's just different. But the main reasoning is, why do you do it? Thank you. Mr. Toastmaster
At this time, I thank Toastmaster Deane very much for his